Japan didn't get its first Little League teams until 1955, but it didn't take long for the island nation to start winning big. And I do mean big. They triumphed in 1967, again in 1968, then again in 1976, and on, winning a total of 11 times, the most of any country not named America. They've won the international tournament 5 times since 2010. The last year Japan was a champion, in 2017, the team from Chiba City won all 4 games in the Japan Championship, and then went 5-0 in the Little League World Series, with the closest game they had being against Mexico, a 4-1 contest. Most of its games went like the victory over the US team from Lufkin, Texas in the finals, a 12-2 drubbing in which the Japanese belted 3 homers and racked 14 hits, while the Americans scratched out just 3. On the other hand, the 2015 champions had close games every step of the way, and only prevailed in the final against Mexico 1-0 after having to go extra innings against Venezuela. The one thing that these two teams have in common is that they're representing the Tokyo Kitsuna Little League, which has produced 4 winners, the most of any single league in the world. Maybe the most iconic of all Japanese players who dominated the Little League World Series was Kotaro Kiyomiya, who was on the mound as a 13-year-old hitting 80 miles per hour, or the equivalent of 104 in an MLB game. He was a man amongst boys, striking out 15 in 6 2/3 innings and blasting 3 homers in 12 at-bats. He claimed to have hit 60 homers in 50 games that season, which no one disputes. His team from that famed Little League of Kitsuna won the championship, Mercy ruling a team from Tennessee 12-2 in the final. So how has Japan won 8 of the past 23 Little League World Series? Sure, the US has won 11 over that same stretch, but an American team is guaranteed to be in the finals every season. The Japanese still have to get through the tough international competition just to get to the finals. It's a daunting task, no doubt, but the ecosystem of Japanese youth baseball is very different than what you'll find in the States. Basically, the Japanese win because they devote themselves to the game like no one else. Seriously. But first, let's address some accusations of cheating. When you think of the ill-gotten gains of the dominance of Little League, the team that should come first to mind is Taiwan, which between 1969 and 1996 won 17 times. In 1973, Taiwan didn't even give up a single hit during the entire series. By 1974, fans were booing them in Williamsport because everyone suspected they were cheating. Little League is supposed to be a local sport, and the teams in the tournament consist of all-star teams from a neighborhood league. But Taiwan had decided that the excellence in youth baseball would give it a propaganda push, and so, in 1969, they fielded teams that were not all-stars from a league, but all-stars from the entire country. That they were able to do this for almost 30 years speaks volumes about the depth of the cheating, but the Japanese were the ones who finally cracked the case in 1997, and lo and behold, Taiwan has never won again. Now, in the dark corners of the internet are some who have accused the Japanese of having some very flexible neighborhood boundaries when it comes to finding players, but this kind of charge smacks of racism and ignores the youth baseball culture in that country. Japan isn't good because it cheats. Japan is good because of the system that produces these teams. The coach of the Bad News Bears was Morris Buttermaker, a man who liked to drink and smoke. Maybe not a great role model for today's youth, but Buttermaker knew baseball, which put him head and shoulders above many of the coaches that American kids start out with when they start playing baseball. As American kids get older, they get better and better coaching, which often comes with a price tag. Garrett Cole had a pitching coach when he was 8, and it's hard to calculate how much Trevor Bauer's family spent helping him turn his middling 70-mile-per-hour fastball into elite stuff. In Japan, there's a different philosophy. The best coaches remain at the youngest level of play. That's where you'd find Shingo Ariyasu, who in his late 60s was still coaching in his local Little League. Located in a gritty part of Tokyo, Shingo is best known for being the coach of Red Sox legend Daisuke Matsuzaka, yet he never tried to rise above the Little League level. This would never happen in the States. Typically, the coaches are the parents or guardians of players, and while some leagues have the resources to train coaches, most don't. A coach with a reputation like Shingo's would be charging big money to work with a prodigy or an all-star team. But in Japan, it doesn't work the same way. On a Saturday and Sunday, from morning till night, Shingo and his coaches work with over 80 kids, who range in age from 5 to 13. An American parent might be spending the same amount of time at a baseball field, but it's usually watching a travel ball tournament, game after game. Not in Japan. Instead of blowing out the UCL of a promising pitcher, as happens too often in the US travel ball circuit, the Japanese do drills, and more drills. Hours of fielding bunts and turning double plays, one after another. The key concept is yakyudo, or the way of baseball, meaning to play baseball as it should be played. A player is taught to have grit and resilience, repetition until there's mastery. Many little leagues in Japan operate just like this. Dedicated coaches who stay for decades, often with many championships to show for it, and 10-hour 2-hour weekend practices that are built on fundamentals. The personification of this ideal is embodied by the great Ichiro Suzuki, who began practicing his swing at the age of 3 and then never really stopped. In 3rd grade, he was hitting off a batting machine set to 65 miles per hour. In Little League, he had the word shuchu, which means concentration, airbrushed on his glove. I think this is also a good time to acknowledge that my pronunciation of some of these words aren't going to be the best. I apologize for any mistakes I make along the way. I promise I'm doing my best. In high school, his team practiced from 3:30 to 8 p.m., broke for dinner, and then had batting practice at 9, which is why, back in 2021, Ichiro surprised a Tokyo high school team by showing up to its practice and crushing homers at the age of 48. The team had written a letter asking him to attend, and touched by the emotion of the letter, Ichiro came. He respected their work ethic and treated them with a special display of his finely honed talents. Didn't charge an appearance fee, didn't try to sell any kind of swing adjuster. He came because that's Yakudo, the way of baseball. To be fair, American greats like Derek Jeter have been supportive of high school baseball, but as Deion Sanders has pointed out, baseball's become too expensive for most people of limited means to play in the US. Travel ball can cost thousands per year, meaning the American form of Yakudo has a dollar sign in front of it. How many talented kids haven't had the opportunity to train with coaches of a decent caliber? Or worse, how many have had to give up the sport entirely due to low funds? In Japan, it just doesn't happen that way. But there are legit criticisms of Japanese youth baseball. Training players to be gritty can sometimes lead to some rather questionable tactics. Take, for example, what can happen to a player a coach thinks is loafing. At a typical Japanese Little League practice, everything is done in a run. If a coach calls for the team to gather, everyone must sprint in. Sprint, not jog, and definitely not walk. But let's say a player decides to coast it in at a firm trot. An American player might have to run foul pole to foul pole, maybe even for the entire practice, in high school. But a kid loafing at Little League probably would either get teased or made to do an extra round of something practice related, not really punished. In certain Japanese leagues, however, the lazy player would be forced to squat down Seiza style, with backside resting on heels for 5 whole minutes. Extreme training methods in Japanese baseball stretch back to the 19th century, when the legendary team at the first higher school in Tokyo incorporated martial arts philosophy into their team ethic. That team would help establish baseball as the country's national sport, and also explain why sitting Seiza persists as a punishment for lax effort. Joining a baseball team in Japan is, in some ways, like joining a religious order. Players are expected to devote themselves totally. For hitters, it's taking 1,000 swings a day, every day. It's not uncommon for a pitcher to throw up to 300 pitches at a practice. After a 7-hour marathon, Japanese players rake the infield until all the marks are gone. When a coach corrects a player, the player takes off his hat and bows his head, listening intently. But this vivacity can sometimes go a bit far. Former Dodgers and Yankees pitcher Hideki Kuroda, who spent 7 years in the big leagues, finishing with a 3.45 ERA and 115 ERA+, described the brutal conditions of his training. In 1st grade, if he gave up a hit, he was smacked on the butt with a bat, a punishment called ketsubeto, or butt bat. His coaches were among the last who still thought that drinking water gave players cramps, and growing up in Osaka, where summer temps would get hot, practices might last over 10 hours. Kuroda would have to sneak off to drink out of a polluted river. When he was 15, he pitched a poor game, and the next day at practice, he was told to run. And run he did, for the next 4 12-hour practices, foul pole to foul pole. Brutal? No doubt. Too far? Well, in many cases, yes, deemed so because of lawsuits by Japanese parents. The most extreme of the old school punishments are no longer administered because they were literally deemed legally to be child abuse. To understand just how popular baseball is in Japan, look no further than the Koshien, a national high school tournament that playing in is the dream of every Japanese schoolboy. The closest American parallel is March Madness, as the Koshien involves 49 high school champions competing in a single elimination tournament. Each game is nationally televised and has an aspect of Hoosiers. Sometimes a team from the backwater is so entrancing that the players become unlikely national heroes. The Koshien, which began in 1915, is part of the national fabric of the country. Baseball is really the only sport that Japanese children can play at a high level, and getting recruited out of a little league to go to a prestigious high school is something that is deeply ingrained in many children's long-term plans. In Japan, high school baseball is a year-round sport, and even in the far north, where it snows regularly, players will scrape ice off the field so they can practice in the dead of winter. The Japanese style of youth baseball serves as a microcosm for how the Japanese generally parent. Whereas American children learn how to become self-expressive at a young age, with an emphasis on their individuality and artistic expression, Japanese children are taught to show more self-regulation. Japanese parents are known for being undoubtedly strict, as they expect children to handle difficult tasks routinely, like sitting seiza as punishment or doing drills for hours. There just isn't a lot of time for self-expression when you spend 2 hours fielding bunts, or laying them down. Just watch an episode of Old Enough on Netflix. Is this good? Is it bad? I don't know, and don't even want to venture a guess. All I do know is that it is indisputably effective for breeding excellence in Little League ball players. So what generally happens to these players? The 2003 Little League World Series featured future big leaguers Randall Grichuk, Jurickson Profar, and Jonathan Schoop, but the player who dominated the series was Yutaro the Tank Tanaka of Japan, whose team crushed Boynton Beach, Florida 10-1. Tanaka fanned 14 in that game. If you had to pick a player who'd make it big, he would have been a natural choice. Tanaka struck out the first 9 batters of the game. Can't miss was a label that the Tank deserved. But as of 2013, the Tank was toiling for the Fukai Miracle Elephants in a Japanese semi-pro league. He never even got a cup of coffee in Nippon Professional Baseball, the Japanese major leagues, but at least he was still in the game, which is more than you can say for many of those stars from the Japanese teams that captured titles in Williamsport. The champions of 2017 are still too young for pro ball, though most are draft eligible as of this year, so we'll see about that team. As for the other championship teams, some players did enjoy solid pro careers. Yosuke Nomura was the captain of the 2001 champs, who won a dramatic final against Florida in walk-off fashion. That series is notable and dubious because of the exploits of Danny Almonte of the Bronx squad, who was 15 years old and mowing down tweens to the delight of millions. Following a few years after the Taiwan cheating scandal broke, Little League had some questions to answer. But that's another story. Back to Nomura. He's still pitching in the MPB, posting career stats of 98 and 76 with a 3.42 ERA. Solid enough numbers for sure. But the Japanese Little League World Series player who has the most upside from a professional standpoint is Kotaro Kiyomiya, who dominated in 2012. He currently plays for the Hokkaido Nippon Ham Fighters. He was the first pick of the Fighters in the 2017 draft, and today he still stands 6 feet tall, just like he did back in 2012. He's added about 20 pounds though. Kotaro was the MVP of the 2022 MPB All-Star Game when he was 23 years old. He's hit 77 homers in his young career, though his average languishes around the Mendoza line generally. But otherwise, the stars of champions past have faded from the game. Another star on the 2012 team was Noriatsu Osaka, who played in high school but never made it to pro ball. The following year, Japan won again, with a team led by Koyu Mizushima, who also played on the U12 national team. If anyone seemed destined for baseball glory, it was him. But it wasn't meant to be. The 2 best Japanese players who remain in the MPB are generally considered to be Munetaka Murakami and Roki Sasaki. Murakami is a hitter who's just 22 years old, and he's already become the youngest Triple Crown winner in MPB history with a .318 batting average, 56 home runs, and 134 RBI. He's eligible to come to the major leagues in 2025, and after his clutch performance in the World Series Baseball Classic, his stock has only risen. He, however, never played in the Little League World Series, and neither did Roki Sasaki, who last year pitched almost 2 perfect games in a row, and has a fastball that tops out at 103 miles per hour. Major League scouts were hoping he'd bypass MPB altogether and sign straight out of high school, but after he decided to stay in the MPB for a few years, he's done nothing but dominate, and at just 20, has a lot of quality baseball ahead of him. He'll one day join Murakami in the major leagues and hopefully achieve a great measure of success. So why is this? Why do the talented Little Leaguers of Japan generally not make it to the next level? I have 2 theories. One is that they get tired of the constant training of Japanese baseball earlier than their peers who didn't go through the same arduous process at that age, and that influences them to either not work as hard as they get older or simply give up on the game. The second is the progression theory, which is more physical. It basically states that bringing along a player with a more delicate, even if just as disciplined approach is more effective for long-term growth. This means no 12-hour practices, at least not until high school, and it seems like the prime Japanese talent is more and more accepting this philosophy as the way to long-term greatness. It's hard projecting the future of a 12-year-old, especially since boys might not hit a growth spurt until well past the age of Little League dominance. But there's still no question that Japan's youth baseball system will continue to produce high-quality teams that will come to Williamsport and compete with the best American teams. It's fair to point out that most of the best American kids are involved with travel ball in the showcase circuit, but nonetheless, Japan is still beating some of the best talent in the world in any given year. And it's not accidental, but formulaic. Will this continue the more Japanese parents adopt the progressive approach? I guess only time will tell. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and click on this playlist for more content just like this. Have a great day, everyone.